Welcome to the MEND, a podcast through the Center for Crime Victim Services here in Vermont. I'm Anna Nasset, and I am your host of this bi-monthly podcast. Today on the show, we have Ericka Reil and Kimberly Colville here to discuss crimes against people with disabilities and the resources available here in our state and nationally. The show was created to take a deeper look at services, organizations, and concepts for victims and survivors of crime and those who serve them. We want to acknowledge the healing process and provide resources not only in our state, but throughout the country that could benefit communities, victims, and survivors of crime. As your host, I myself am a victim of crime, and my healing process and how I navigate has been varied throughout the years. I went from hiding in the shadows to standing up and speaking out, and am honored that I get to share this platform with so many people such as you too. I always want to begin with a trigger warning. Our goal is to create a safe place to discuss topics, but within that we may occasionally hear stories that are triggering and have sensitive subject matter. So as always, listen at your own discretion, and welcome to the MEND. Today, I'm so excited to have Ericka and Kimberly join me from the Vermont Center for Independent Living, which is located in Montpelier and Burlington.
We're located in Montpelier. Our central office is in Montpelier. We have satellite offices in Burlington, Morrisville, Bennington, Brattleboro, and Rutland.
Awesome.
So I work at a satellite office in Burlington.
Okay, very good. The Center for Independent Living is a nonprofit organization directed and staffed by individuals with disabilities who works to promote the dignity, independence, and civil rights of Vermonters with disabilities. Like other independent living centers across the country, Vermont Center for Independent Living is committed to cross-disability services and the promotion of active citizenship and working with others to create services that support self-determination and full participation in community life. Ericka is the advocacy organizer at the center, and Kimberly is a peer advocate. So thank you so much for being here today. I'd love just to start by for the listeners to get to know you two a little bit better. Can you share with me what you want about your history and how you came to be voices within our state and really nationally with the work you're doing for crimes committed against people with disabilities?
If you don't mind, I'll
Go for it.
So I'm not only a person with a disability, I'm a victim of several child abuse and sexual victimization, but also it was kind of a fluke because I was reading a Time magazine article about sexual abuse in other countries, and Kimberly and I started talking, basically, and we started thinking about what's happening in other countries around people with disabilities, and then we started just talking about what's going on in our country, and then we started narrowing it down to what's going on in Vermont, and realized there weren't a lot of services for people with disabilities in our country or in our state. And then we started talking about just our friends and people we worked with and people that were coming to our offices, and we realized we wanted to change the language and wanted to change the culture and start seeing what was out there and start talking about victimization of people with disabilities.
Yeah, I also incurred my own victimhood. And I think, through talking with Ericka, once I joined the center 6 years ago, I was still dealing with the aftermath and trauma of that. And I think it was in talking to Ericka and others around her that I really learned that part of my healing came through helping others to share parts of my story, but also to do the deep work to realize that, yes, I went through this, but this is not who I am. This doesn't all encompass me. And I think to heal, basically. So in doing this work, I've found a way to heal myself at times, although like anyone who's a victim, it comes back. when you least expect it, and then you move forward. And I'd like to help people, and this is a way I can do that.
That's awesome. As our audience will hear, these two are warriors, you are superheroes, and the work that you're doing is so incredible. And thank you for sharing how you got called to that work, because it's really amazing. As we start to kind of unpack this, I think it's important to start by looking at the American Disability Act. Can you explain just briefly, because I know it's each one of these topics could be its own episode, but can you explain to our listener what that is and how it protects people with disabilities?
Certainly. The Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, was enacted in 1890, so it's a very young law. It's actually turning 30. I can go into a whole spiel about the ADA, but in a nutshell, really, it's a law that makes equal protections for people with disabilities. It means that people with disabilities have the same equal rights as somebody without a disability. That's it in a nutshell. And again, I could go into a whole tangent about what the ADA actually reads.
Okay. But that's a really good nutshell of it. And I'm shockingly sad that it's only turning 30 years old.
Yes.
Wow. So you two work to ensure that people can live independently. Can you share with me ways in which people with disabilities rely on support systems to live independently?
I think one of the things that is so clear about people with disabilities, and also through the help of the ADA, is that we're trying to build equity and equality. So individuals with disabilities might need support or help to live the life of what a person without a disability lives. So I think to bring that bar up is one of our main goals for each individual, and that can look different for each person. So my work as a peer counselor is really digging in deep with an individual who comes to the center and looking at their goal or goals. Usually it's one major goal and then little goals on top of that, or the goal can change over time. Kind of help them and give them support and resources to meet that goal, but also supporting them to do it on their own, because a lot of individuals may have had a caregiver or a parent really do things for them. But I think as a person with disabilities, once I found my own power of learning how to do things on my own, making the phone calls or advocating myself, that's where I found my real power. So that's kind of what we do. Ericka, would you like to add anything?
I don't think so. I think you got it in a nutshell, Kimberly.
Okay.
But yeah, I can't express enough, like you said, it's just finding your own power. Because a lot of times in your situation, you lose that power. And and we really try to bring that power back.
Awesome. Like I said, superheroes. Within that kind of loss of power, violence against people with disabilities is statistically very high. It's underreported. It's underserved. Can you share with our listeners about data and how we can better educate ourselves and advocate for victims of crime of people with disabilities?
Okay, I'll take that one. I'm a little bit the data guru of of our team, so I'll cover that. So statistically, individuals are at a high risk of crime because of their vulnerability. Individuals are more vulnerable due to their dependence or need for support of others. And individuals with multiple disabilities, the bar is even higher. They're even more vulnerable. Particularly, most crimes are committed against people with cognitive disabilities overall. So that's something to be aware of. 40% of victims who have disabilities know their offender. It's either a family member, caregiver, or support person. So that makes it very hard for them to speak out because with victimization, there's a lot of trauma, but in a sense, having support or having the main person be a support person who is also victimizing you, that's an incredible layer to deal with. I know in my own case, not relying on my inner voice that this is wrong, this should stop. Until it blew up in my face. I had feelings long before I knew I had to leave the situation. And, I think what I've learned in the preceding years is really to trust my voice. And luckily, I personally have had a lot of support to do that. But let's go on with the statistics. I think I've covered all of them, unless you have.
In the other case with people with disabilities is we're also used to, especially those of us who rely on a support person to dress or take care of us, do our activities of daily living. We're also used to people handling our personal bodies at a younger age, which is why we're more susceptible. Mm-hmm. And we're also very used to they take care of our like my husband is also my caregiver, so he takes care of my medication. So, if he did my medications wrong, how would I know?
Right.
In some cases, our caregivers handle our money. They handle our finances. They handle this. So there are many different affects of where a caregiver can abuse us.
Yes.
And I think also this gets into a whole nother realm, but we're often not taught things as people with disabilities because we might be pulled away from the classroom, the regular classroom, or our peer group in schools might look different than the average kid. And that's a whole nother discussion, but I want it to be like that education piece of just normal life.
Right.
It's not always there. I won't say that it's completely missing, but a lot of individuals that we work with have said, I didn't learn this in school. I missed this in school. Where was I? And
right. And that goes back into that needing the equal education, the equal opportunities. Right. That's what you're talking about is when the victimization is happening specifically from a caregiver or support person, how do you report when you're relying on that person? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And many people with disabilities are relying on caregivers to support them. Can you tell us a little bit more about caregiver abuse?
Certainly. I can tell you, I think we can go into statistics, which Kimberly already did, but caregiver abuse happens in so many different ways. We've already run over mishandling medications, mishandling money. There's also threats of, abuse of a service dog, breaking equipment, wheelchairs, walkers. There's times when there's sexual abuse. There are times when people with disabilities are put out as trafficked victims. There are times when people with a mental health diagnosis are, they're made worse by an abuser. There are times when people are told nobody's going to believe you because you have a mental health diagnosis or because you have such and such, or they're going to put you in a nursing home. They're going to, all these threats. And these things are very scary for us and also very real. Mm-hmm. And we're taught, I was born with a disability. Things are just taught to us at a very young age. You can't believe that. Like Kimberly said, I was pulled out of sex education classes. So I did not know bad touch, good touch. When I developed puberty, I did not know what was going on with me. I've heard stories of children not being taught just about basic sexuality. So when things happen to them, they had no idea. They thought it was games.
Right.
So all these different things happen to us, and yet there are looked at other people to say, oh, that's Kimberly and her caregiver. So that's just the way things are.
Right.
And so people just look the other way when it comes to us. And it's very difficult because if that's the normal for us, as it is in so many other abusive type situations, then that's all we know. And it happens at a lot of us at such a young age that is our normal. And that's what we grow to expect.
And you're working to change that.
Absolutely.
To change the normal. Thank you for explaining that further. Today on the MEND, I have Ericka Reil and Kimberly Colville from the Center for Independent Living here in Vermont. Many listeners may think this doesn't happen in our state, this doesn't happen in our town. Without going into graphic stories, can you share with me the names of some lives lost here in this state and what the work you've done to keep their memory alive and to change that?
You'll have to excuse me. I do get emotional when I mention these two young men. We did, in our state, lose many others, but I'm going to mention two that are very near and dear. We lost Jeffrey Kitterledge from Montpelier, Vermont. He was 20 years old. He died of sepsis. He was a wheelchair user. He was killed by his father. And we lost Isaac Robtill. He was age 13. Vodka was put into his feeding tube by his mother. The unfortunate thing about these two is all over the country, people that harm people with disabilities do not get the same prison sentence as those that harm people without disabilities. We do not get the same coverage in newspapers. Sometimes we're hidden on page 5. There are many others that have died, but these two are very near. I knew both of these gentlemen. What we do to keep the memories of those and many others that have lost is every year on March 1st, there is a Disability Day of mourning for those that have lost their lives in the hands of their caregivers. And every year around the country, people with disabilities mourn those that have perished in the hands of their caregiver. And one of the quotes that are used, I'm going to read it, is at the end of the day, we say, mourn for the dead and fight like hell for the living. And that's very powerful to me. Every time that Kimberly and I do a training around caregiver abuse awareness, we mention the names of those that have lost their lives in Vermont and show their pictures, just to keep the fresh memories that there are people in our state that have lost their lives in the hands of their caregivers.
Absolutely, and there are people in our state going through that right now. And I think it's so important that we keep their memories alive. And thank you for sharing that with me.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, this is a very heavy day here.
Yes.
So crimes against people with disabilities, as we were saying, are so underreported. They're under-prosecuted, obviously. There's so many obstacles in the way for people trying to report or try and have any sort of justice. How can victim service providers better serve people with disabilities?
Well,
it's a huge question, but...
Yeah, well, I think, again, I want to bring up statistically, 21% of individuals with a disability don't report because they are basically, they're afraid they're not going to believe, or there's that barrier of they may not remember things in sequence. And I think, a lot of victims who go through victimization, especially that first interview, they're not going to remember things in sequence anyways, because it's so much trauma that's going on in the brain at the same time. But add another layer of disability on top of that, cognitively or just emotionally not remembering, and especially in the case of people with mental health, that they may already have the stigma attached to them, not to be believed when they should be listened to, because of X, Y, and Z diagnosis. And I think the most important thing that we can do when we're supporting a person is tell them, I believe you. Whatever you tell me, I believe. I think getting over trauma and having that one person that says, I believe you, is so important. And then kind of digging deeper to what the story really is. And I think law enforcement providers need to really keep that in mind, that whatever the story is, it happened to this person. And this is the person's experience. And take that at face value and then go forward to sift out the specifics. So.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also what really helps a lot of people is, you see no diss to our law enforcement at all, but law enforcement, especially an officer, are very scary. Sometimes it's a person's first encounter with law enforcement, and they're using words that, sometimes I don't even understand, and I've worked with law enforcement. And if you can get somebody that can get down to a person's level and just talk to them as we're talking, and, try to just be what I call a sleuth and try to get beyond the layers, and then go back to the officer and say, this is what they're talking about. Because, you see an officer with their guns, and it's the scariest, intimidating. Plus, this person's already been intimidated enough.
Absolutely.
And law enforcement has done a lot and has a great deal of respect in my heart, but they are very scary.
Yeah.
And I think over time, just dealing with law enforcement or people at the Attorney General's office, more and more, I think I have people that I've built close relationships in this work with come forward to me and say, what about this? Or I don't get this. Or I know I had someone come to me and ask about how do I communicate with a deaf person? What is the technology that we need in our offices to be better accessible? I mean, just ask those basic questions. And then it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's why Ericka and I do this work, is that if you don't know or you need help figuring that out, we're more than happy to work with you and develop a game plan for yourself or the office that you work in.
And I've had the same thing happen with lawyers, working, and they're just like, I don't know. And we're just like, ask, use us, use your resources.
Yeah. I think it's okay to say you don't know. It's when you stop asking or you don't ask, that's where the problem occurs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that's the thing is, like, if we can all just be honest
Yes.
about what we know and what we don't,
Yeah.
and be able to create a better system together.
Right.
And, I felt the same way of just, like, when I first had to start, like, working with cops, I was terrified. I had no reason to be, but I was terrified. And, as I started to work with an advocate and as time went on, I was much more at ease, but that can be really scary. And so having these people and having people at the Attorney General's office or law enforcement who are like, help us be able to do a better job is so important, because none of us are perfect and we all have
Right.
something to learn.
Right.
And we're supposed to be the experts. We're still learning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we're going to figure it out, even if we don't have the answers, we have a whole team of people across the country and in Vermont that we can tap into and ask the questions of. So.
That's awesome. That's so great.
Yeah.
How can, for our listeners today who aren't advocates or victim service providers, how can they better be there for people with disabilities in their communities, whether these people are victims of crime or just, in the workplace or whatever that might be? How can people be better community members to their whole community?
I think don't look the other way. If you see something that doesn't look right, ask. Or, there's been many times I'm in the store and I see something. I don't just walk away. I safely, not putting the person in danger, just say, "Are you okay?" Just try to be a better advocate, learning, educating myself, saying, "I don't know," learning about my community, learning who's in my community, just learning about different resources, trying to figure things out, just meeting my neighbors, just being there for people and not thinking this doesn't happen in my backyard. Because after reading and educating myself and not being the skeptic that I truly am, just going, hey, this is a topic that has to be discussed, and we can't shy away from it anymore. We have to talk about these hard conversations.
Yeah.
And we have to start thinking this does happen in Vermont. We're not sheltered from these horrible, horrible things.
And I think one of the things also as we continue in this work is that Vermont is a lovely state. It's beautiful, and we all live here for a reason, and it's because we love the beauty, but it is also in some areas of Vermont very poor. Now, I'm not going to judge. I live in Chittenden County, and so I'm not going to put labels on anywhere else in Vermont, but it's a poor state, and we all know that it's hard to make a living here for various reasons, but things can be hidden in the shadows in the state. I think we just need to keep talking to each other. I think overall the world has not learned in the last couple of years. We communicate so much through technology that we don't have conversations with people. I know that I can be in touch on my computer and my iPhone all day long with people. But I go home and I realize I might not have talked to a living human all day. And I think that's very important to reach out again and just know your neighbors, know who's in your community is very important.
Absolutely, I agree. And know what your community needs.
Yes.
There are people in your community that are in need, and especially a little area like this, there's just a very big gap between the poverty and the extreme wealth, and we don't see that side of what people are really needing and the assistance.
Not to contradict both of you, but remember, it's not just the wealth who abuses.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry, it's not just the poor who abuses.
And thank you for bringing that up. I mean, it happens in all social economic stratospheres. I think, on the low end, things can be hidden, and also on the high end, things can be hidden, and that's another big conversation, but it hits everyone too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to really be aware and be a better community member and be a better citizen. Yeah. We have gone over a wealth of information today and did not even scratch the surface, I know. But do you feel like there's any really not main points but bigger points that you would like to share with listeners as we start to wind down?
I think this conversation, I can't stress enough that this conversation, abuse as a whole, needs to be talked about more. And it's not just women It's people of all shapes and sizes and sexes. And we need to have those hard conversations. And we need to include at every table people with disabilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also think, if someone comes to you, believe what they're telling you, and, give them the space to share their whole story without judgment, which I know in the world is hard to do, but that's very important. Even if you're that one support person that's listening and continues to listen and hear, that's really important to someone who's been victimized.
Absolutely. Keep listening and keep coming to the table for the hard conversations. And I thank you too for joining me here today for just that. I love working with you both and knowing you, and just can't say enough for the work that you're doing for people in the state and nationally. Like, you're changing it, and that's incredible. And that's not an easy place to be, but much respect and gratitude for both of you.
Thank you.
If you would like to learn more about the Vermont Center for Independent Living, you can visit their website, which is vcil.org. Is there any other big resource you would like to share, or do you feel like that's a good?
If you go to the vcl.org website, you can find both of our emails, and you can ask us any question. We're annoying. We work all the time, so you can email us day or night, and we'll probably answer you.
True.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, I think, since violence and crime is so broad, definitely I think the best thing to do is get in touch with us, and we can get you in touch with the right people if we're not the right people.
Absolutely.
And we also have out-of-state contacts and out-of-country contacts, so no matter where it's happening, we can get you in contact with somebody.
Like I said, freaking superheroes. We're like, oh, no matter where it's at, we've got our capes. We're ready.
Yep.
I always like to close the show with some sort of positive message. If there's one parting thought for our listeners, what would it be?
I think keep moving forward. If you're in a situation where you are experiencing some type of crime, that you don't need to live that way. There are people out here to support you. And I think that's a real key thing, that moving forward and living to where you want to live your best life is important.
Yeah, I have to agree with that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ericka and Kimberly, for joining me today. If you have questions or ideas about the show, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me at anna@standupresources.com. Thank you again for being here. I'm your host, Anna Nasset, and we'll see you next time on the MEND.